Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first lecture on the epistemology of fake news. Okay, so let's begin with the first section, understanding the threat. I can imagine that, just like me, many of you have been following the news unusually closely lately, and you'll no doubt have heard that there's a lot of fake news about the coronavirus circulating online. For example, you may read that Bill Gates is spreading the coronavirus in order to implant microchips in our brains. You may read that the virus was engineered as a bioweapon and that it contains genetic sequences inserted from HIV. Or you may read that 5G mobile networks are in some way implicated in the pandemic, either by directly emitting the virus through some kind of miasma or by weakening the human immune system through some kind of high-frequency electromagnetic radiation. If you come down with a cough, a fever, and difficulty breathing, and turn to the internet in search of a cure, you face a bewildering array of options. You may be encouraged to eat large amounts of garlic, ginger, or hot peppers, to rub goose fat on your chest, to expose yourself to high temperatures, or maybe to expose yourself to low temperatures, to drink cow's urine, or bathe in cow's dung. If you had tuned into Alex Jones of InfoWars a little while ago, you would have been encouraged to gargle with Super Blue Silver Immune Gargle, which contains colloidal silver. And of course, as we heard only a few days ago, Donald Trump has been taking hydroxychloroquine, a drug developed for the treatment of malaria, but which still has not been fully tested for its safety and efficacy in treating COVID-19. The list of things I just mentioned is varied, ranging from wild conspiracy theories to theories that are just false, misleading, or lack sufficient information, supporting evidence. But despite the variation, I'm calling reports of all of these things I just mentioned fake news. That is to say, I'm operating with a particularly broad definition of the term, and one that's probably at odds with the way in which it's used by others. For example, Trump uses the term fake news to express antipathy towards any content that conflicts with his own beliefs or interests. Some might say that Trump has tainted the term by using it this way, but I've decided to stick to it because this variability in its meaning actually reflects some of the themes that I want to discuss. So, to be clear, what I mean by fake news is publicly available content that presents itself as reliable, factual information, but is in fact false, misleading, or at least in some cases, produced with the intention to deceive. So satirical news media, such as The Onion or the Borowitz Report, which make it clear that they're satirical, don't count as fake news by my definition, because they don't present their content as reliable, factual information. Public posts, websites, blogs, and the like all count as fake news if they do present their content as factual, even in part, and if that content is false or misleading. Of course, there are going to be borderline cases, but this rough definition will do for our purposes. What's important is that fake news is presented as reliable, factual information when it's really false or misleading. Of course, fake news has been around for a long time, but as we've all become acutely aware, fake news travels farther and faster online than it ever has been able to do before. So you might ask, what does epistemology have to do with fake news? Well, epistemology is the philosophical study of knowledge, and knowledge involves both true belief and rationality. That is, if you know a statement P, then it follows that you have a true belief that P, and you have reached that belief in the right kind of way, that is, in a way that's rational or reliable, or is based appropriately on reasons or evidence. If you believe something true, but you don't have any reasons or evidence for your belief, then your belief is just a lucky guess and doesn't amount to knowledge. And what I want to talk about today are some of the threats fake news poses towards knowledge. Of course, there is the obvious threat that fake news poses towards knowledge. Since you know something only if you have a true belief, if you're misled by fake news into believing something false, then obviously you lack knowledge. But there are further, less obvious ways in which fake news poses a threat to knowledge. And I'm going to discuss 3 of these less obvious threats to knowledge, which I've listed on your handout. They are the threat from irrationality, the threat from rational polarization, and the threat from relativism. So first, let me say something a little bit about the threat from irrationality. A striking feature of our current situation is that fake news seems to go hand in hand with political polarization, when groups on either side of a political spectrum move further and further apart from one another. This kind of political polarization of factual belief is hardly new to the US, where conservatives and liberals are polarized over all sorts of empirical matters, such as whether humans are a significant cause of global warming or whether concealed carry laws increase gun crime. And similar patterns of polarization can be found around the world. The thing is that one prominent explanation for why we are so susceptible to fake news, why we polarize in this way, appeals to human irrationality. But of course, irrationality poses a threat to knowledge. If we manage to form true beliefs but do so in an irrational way, our true beliefs are only as good as lucky guesses, and luck is the enemy of knowledge. This is the first threat I'm going to discuss, the threat posed by irrationality. However, irrationality is not the whole story, because it turns out that we can be misled by fake news and we can be led to polarize even though we're rational. This might seem like good news from the point of view of knowledge, but unfortunately it's not. Because if rational people systematically polarize over factual beliefs, which are either true or false, this implies that the rules of rationality are not a particularly reliable way of getting at the truth. So the second threat to knowledge I will discuss is the threat posed by rational polarization. The final threat that fake news poses to knowledge that I'd like to discuss is the threat from relativism. This threat stems not so much from the fact that there's a lot of fake news about, but from a prevalent philosophical approach that people seem to have towards fake news and towards truth and knowledge more broadly. To use a cliche, the attitude is sometimes called post-truth, but it's really a crude version of relativism. And this connects with issues that I've been grappling with since I went to graduate school. An example of this kind of crude relativism is expressed by the alt-right internet troll Mike Cernovich in an interview I happened to read in The New Yorker in 2016. So Cernovich had been spewing out massive quantities of misinformation in the run-up to the 2016 presidential election in the US, much of which was targeted at Hillary Clinton. And in the interview, Cernovich basically acknowledges that not all of which he posts is true or has been carefully vetted. And he clearly doesn't think that the truth or evidence matters. What matters, he seems to think, is just getting the message out there, persuading people to take up his point of view, completely regardless of whether what he says is true or is supported by evidence. And he justifies this by saying, quote, "Look, I read postmodernist theory in college. If everything is narrative, then we need alternatives to the dominant narrative." So according to this crude relativism, there's no such thing as objective truth, reason, or knowledge. No such thing as fake news, objectively speaking. Rather, what's fake news and what's real news all depends on your perspective. Since there is no objective truth, all you can do is fight your corner, get your own narrative out there, and persuade as many as you can to join your team. Success is measured in numbers of tweets and retweets. What's surprising about this new development is that relativism has for a long time been the darling of the left, particularly prevalent among left-wing intellectuals in the humanities. Reading that New Yorker article about the alt-right, in fact, took me right back to grad school, where relativism seemed to be part of the furniture. I did my PhD at the Department of History and Philosophy of Science in Cambridge in the midst of the relativistic turn in the study of science. And relativism, I think, still strikes many on the left as a very attractive view. So in the rest of this lecture and in the next lecture, I'm going to discuss each of these threats to knowledge in turn, but I will spend most of my time on the third. I think that there are many people on the left who react to the crude relativism of the alt-right and who want to defend truth, reason, and democracy from this scourge. But given the power of relativism over the popular imagination, it may be hard to find arguments against it. So, if you're one of those people who finds relativism attractive, I hope to convince you that it's not. And if you're one of those people who finds relativism unattractive, hopefully what I can do today is help you out with some arguments against it.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.